we're seeing the amount of Aero holders increase, or locked Aero holders increase. And this, at the end of the day, is a network. Its power is based on how many people are participating, and we're starting to see more and more holders participating in this protocol. And so I think that is kind of the big switch that's happening right now.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of WAGMI TV. We have a really important Aerodrome update for you guys. We have some shifts in the trend since we last spoke with you all about a month ago. And so we have some important updates to share. We're going to cover some data and get you guys updated on the latest for Aero. So I'm going to kick it over to Soam to walk through some of what we're seeing from an analytical standpoint in the dashboards.
Yeah, thanks, Sia. Before we hop into it, I just want to remind everyone, last week we got a request to do a deep dive on the tokenomics of Aerodrome. So for anybody who hasn't watched that, I think before, you watch this episode, I think it's important to go and check that one out if you're not familiar with kind of the dynamics. The main takeaway there that we kind of explained was that the value of the Aerodrome ecosystem actually comes from the amount of projects that are actually getting involved in using it as the liquidity hub on base. And so the more projects that are participating in this, the more veAERO, aka locked Aero, is going to be out there, meaning that the inflationary pressures of the token maybe aren't as much of a concern. Obviously, the flywheel and everything is explained in that video, so definitely go check that out. So now getting into it, we wanted to give you guys kind of a 1 month update since then. And so we'll hop right into it. The Aerodrome metrics dashboard, we'll also have this linked. And kind of the main takeaway here is that, after a really, really explosive kind of Q1, we're seeing some of the kind of metrics cool down across the board. Now, this is obviously consistent with the entire market, right? Bitcoin has been consolidating now for the better part of a couple months. And swap volumes and stuff are down across the board. And so all of these kind of metrics are consistent with that. But we wanted to provide you with kind of the updates, the facts, and the data that goes along with it. So the first thing, I'll take you guys to is obviously we had this huge run up from like about epoch, like starting about 25 for a couple months all the way to about 35, 40, where, the last few epochs here have been pretty stagnant on the TVL front, and we're going to give you guys some comparisons later in the video on that, especially as it relates to Uniswap. The next thing, obviously, volumes, coming down from incredibly elevated levels, so that's to be expected, kind of consistent with the market itself cooling down. Swap fees, this is actually a benefit for traders. We had a video before on the slipstream upgrade and the benefits that brings in terms of lower fees and stuff like that. So we do expect that to come down, but obviously not this much. This is a reflection of we think a decrease in volume in terms of like those dropping swap fees. So that's pretty much everything on this screen. Now the good news here is that the average lock duration, which is like for the people who are actually locking veAERO, how long are they actually locking it for? The max lock is 4 years. So this has remained very high, and that's exactly what you want to see. So for the people in the ecosystem and the projects in the ecosystem, they're definitely bought in for the long term, and that's reflected kind of in that specific metric. Now, the one thing that folks who are holding Aero and looking to invest in the project might see as a bit of a red flag, and something that we wanted to point out is that this stat right here is pretty important. This is the entire idea of if the number of locked Aero is outpacing the number of unlocked Aero, then the actual supply of the Aero token doesn't actually mean that much, and you actually you can get some sort of a deflationary mechanic given the lock percentage. Now, the key thing here is that over time, this lock percentage has been slowly dropping, meaning that more and more Aerodrome tokens are circulating out in the market. Now, this isn't by no means like a panic place to panic by any means. I think it's pretty consistent with just the general slowdown of the growth in the ecosystem over the last month, kind of tempering this crazy run up that we've had, right? Everything else is pretty consistent, right? Like locked Aero holders continue to rise. We thought that was a really good thing. Lot growth has been strong. We've barely had any you're not going to have any really negative weeks when it comes to lot growth, which is good to see. And so those were kind of like the main metrics we wanted to take you through. Ev, I'd love to kind of get your opinion. I know the last video you had some thoughts on all these metrics. What are you thinking when you're seeing these?
Yeah, I think those are all good points. And I think one thing I'd like to draw attention to on this dashboard here is that bottom right dash or lens where it's talking about the locked arrow holders. And so, although we're seeing maybe some not so great metrics around how the supply is being used, we're seeing the amount of arrow holders increase or locked arrow holders increase. And this, at the end of the day, is a network. Its power is based on how many people are participating, and we're starting to see more and more holders participating in this protocol. And so I think that is kind of the big switch that's happening right now. Is we're initially there were a lot of protocols that came in, sucked up the supply, locked their arrow, and were able to delegate the emissions to the pools that they wanted to. Now what we're starting to see is some of the smaller players come in, also be arrow holders and participate in which pools they want to vote for as well. So I think it's like this interesting probably switch or transition from that initial run up of protocols snapping a ton of tokens to now, hey, let's get some larger participation in this protocol, and really that's going to create more and more power and really turn Aerodrome into that central liquidity hub of base. So I think you did a great job of covering it, but just wanted to draw attention to that.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't have said it better myself. Definitely a chart that we're going to be looking for. Every week here, every epoch, we'll keep you guys posted on that. Leading up to, I believe it was Epoch 67 is kind of the one that's circled on the calendars later this year. Cool. Now, the other one I wanted to take you guys through is the veAERO leaderboard. Speaking of the network, speaking of the projects that are involved, let's see what's going on over here. And honestly, it's a lot of the same. It's a lot of cooling down after an extremely crazy growth period, right? So over here, from Epoch 33 onwards, you're gonna have like a pretty steep rise in growth, and obviously going back earlier last year and the growth that we've seen now the last few epochs has been pretty pretty stable in a way, right? Where we're not seeing like the type of exponential growth that we were seeing early on, which is also expected. As we saw on the previous screen, these protocols that are getting involved are locking their aerodrome for a long time, so they're definitely in it for the long run. But we're not seeing that like crazy steep increase that we were seeing before. Here, I believe there's been a few more projects added to this. These are obviously the protocol holders for the token. So that's obviously good to see on a month over month basis. I think there's a few more projects on this list that weren't on here previously. And yeah, I mean, what stands out to you here? Obviously, this is the same holder chart that we kind of just looked at. A promising trend there. We like to see that continuously going up. But generally, anything stand out to you here before we kind of deep dive into some comparisons between Aerodrome and Uniswap?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of the same players at the top of this leaderboard, and it's obviously been difficult for protocols to come in and be able to buy a ton of Aero to lock, just because the price has had such a high run up, and so you honestly could see this pullback in the Aero token price be healthy for the ecosystem, because it's allowing new protocols, like you just mentioned, to come into this leaderboard and participate. That's really when the accumulation is going to happen for more protocols to come in and participate. So I think you nailed it, but yeah, just wanted to point out that there's probably more growth coming when it comes to protocols being added to this leaderboard.
Definitely. I think that's a great point. I mean, you have some sort of the network effect and the flywheel. This is when we, in the previous video, we talked about this positive flywheel, this reinforcing action. That's exactly what we're hoping to see here, right? Like, in theory, there should be a price at which Aero just starts getting scooped up by projects, because they're like, we wanted to get involved when Aero was at like $2. Now it's at like $1. Like, let's get involved now when it's at a 50% discount. So that'll definitely be something interesting to see. So that's pretty much it on the dashboards. We do want to throw it over to Sia, do a little bit of comparable analysis as it relates to how Aero is doing and versus Uniswap. Last video, you guys can go check that out. But last video, we saw that Aero was really outpacing the growth of Uniswap. That was promising. So let's check in on what's going on over there.
Yeah, let's do it. Thanks for that rundown, Zoe. That was awesome. So really quick, won't take too long, but definitely, like Zoe was saying, want to kind of revisit the statistics in comparison between the growth of Aerodrome and Uniswap. And the main thing I want to highlight is the month-over-month change in TVL. So these two numbers right here, the 29% and 7.5%. So over the last month, we saw Aerodrome grow in TVL about 7.5%, and then Uniswap 29.3%. And really, the big call out here is that this trend essentially was reversed about a month ago. Aerodrome was growing at a faster rate than Uniswap, and obviously, referring back to that last video, you guys will be able to check out more detail there. But at the same time, Uniswap for their TVL is growing quite quickly month over month, where Aerodrome we've seen a little bit of a slowdown. And honestly, I think some of this we can definitely chalk up to Slipstream being launched. And also I think part of it is, looking at the Aerodrome chart, we've just had such a massive gain in TVL in the last, 2-3 months, call it, that, it almost seems like it's time for it to kind of, consolidate a little bit. And people are going to kind of pick and choose where they actually want to hold their tokens, right? So I think that it's somewhat natural to have this. I mean, it'd be crazy if it just went up and to the right forever, right? So somewhat natural, but then also, I know Ev was making some good points about the update to Slipstream, how it becomes more comparable to Uniswap. And so, just wanted to give a quick rundown there because that trend has changed since we last spoke. So.
Yeah, and I think one thing just to add to that is when you look at those 1 month changes that you just had up there, it's bullish for the base ecosystem. I think we saw the top 4 or 5 all gaining on the 1 month change. So, I think, there's really a battle that's going to start between Aerodrome and Uniswap for, TVL and being that central liquidity hub. But you're seeing other projects on base, being quite successful in the last month as well, which is always bullish.
Yeah, I think for me, honestly, the takeaway is that this is natural, right? I mean, to Sia's point, it's not just going to keep going up forever, right? We have to have some of these pullbacks in order to have that healthier market and make sure that we're establishing that competition, getting the accumulation phases. I mean, we saw multiple days during the run-up of Aero where it was going, 40, 50, 60% in a day easily, right? So it needs this time to cool off. I know we went through the chart last week where we were kind of talking about how it could range for a little bit here as we kind of settle all this out. And then to Evan's point, I think it's a great point, right? As long as the base ecosystem continues to grow and get fed, Aero, we've really talked about being that proxy for base since base doesn't have its own token, right? And so that's another thing where it's like, hey, if you're bullish on Aero in the long term, it's always a good time to accumulate when, to Sam's point, you're about a 50% discount off of some of the all-time highs. But, right, we just wanted to kind of make you all aware of some of the things that we're seeing in the space because it isn't necessarily as bullish as it was at that point. But again, natural. And I think that doesn't mean that it cannot continue to be bullish moving forward. It's just what's being seen on the charts and just the reality of things. So that's kind of my takeaway of the whole thing.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah, I love it. And, obviously we're going to keep updating you guys on the trends of what we're seeing from a TVL perspective, activity perspective, anything we can get to get you guys updated on the latest with Aero. So obviously stay tuned for that. If you got value out of this, like, comment, subscribe. We always love hearing, some of the direction that you guys are headed in, what you guys want to see, and how you guys are feeling about Aero and other projects. So continue to do that. And until next week, WAG me.